Imagine building a life where every day meant work, uncertainty, and starting from almost nothing. Living in colonial America wasn't just wooden houses and simple freedom. It was hard labor from sunrise to sunset, harsh winters, limited food, disease, and rules that controlled nearly every part of daily life. Families relied on each other, communities stuck together, and survival depended on skill, faith, and sheer endurance more than comfort or choice. If you enjoy these short human stories from history, don't forget to like and subscribe. It really helps the channel grow. And tell me where you're listening from. It never stops amazing me seeing people from opposite sides of the world sharing the same story. All right, tonight we're stepping back into how people actually lived in colonial America, not the myth, but the real, everyday struggle behind it.
You've just woken up in colonial America sometime in the early 1700s. The first thing that hits you isn't what you see, it's what you smell. There's wood smoke drifting through the air mixed with something earthier. Maybe it's the animals nearby, or perhaps it's just the general smell of a world where people rarely wash. Your nose wrinkles slightly, but you're already getting used to it. That's how the human body works. You know, it adapts faster than you'd think. The good news is you're alive and relatively healthy in an era where both of those things are pretty remarkable achievements. The bad news? Well, you're about to discover that almost everything you take for granted in modern life simply doesn't exist yet. But here's the thing that might surprise you. The people around you aren't miserable. They're just living the only life they know. And they've figured out ways to find joy even when things are tough. You're lying on what passes for a bed in this era. It's not like the mattresses, you know. This is basically a wooden frame with rope strung across it, topped with a thin mattress stuffed with straw or corn husks. The ropes have stretched overnight, leaving you with a saggy dip in the middle. You can feel every single piece of straw poking through the rough cloth. Your back aches in places you didn't know backs could ache. That's just how sleeping works here. Everyone wakes up a little sore. The room around you is dim, lit only by whatever sunlight manages to squeeze through the small windows. There's no glass in these windows. Glass costs more than most people make in a year. Instead, there are wooden shutters that you can close to keep out rain and cold, but that also keeps out light. Some families stretch oiled paper or cloth across their windows, which lets in a little light, but makes everything look cloudy and strange. You can hear your stomach rumbling. That's actually a good sign. It means you're not one of the many colonists who go to bed hungry. But it also means it's time to start the day, because getting food on the table in colonial America is an all-day job that starts before sunrise. The house is starting to stir around you. You can hear the soft thud of bare feet on wooden floors, the creak of floorboards that have been settling for decades. Someone's already up and moving. Probably the woman of the house, because her day starts earliest of all. She needs to get the fire going again because it died down overnight, and without it, there's no way to cook food or heat water or stay warm. You swing your legs out of bed and your feet hit the floor with a shock. The floor is just packed dirt, hard as stone and cold as winter. Some wealthier families have wooden floors, but most people live with floors made of earth that's been pounded down until it's smooth and solid. It's actually surprisingly practical, easy to sweep, and it doesn't cost anything to install, but it's always cold. and when it rains hard, sometimes water seeps up through the ground. The cold hits your body like a slap. There's no central heating here, obviously, and the fire that kept the house slightly warm yesterday evening has died down to glowing coals. You can see your breath in the air. Everyone's breath makes little puffs of steam in the morning, even in summer. In winter, people sometimes wake up to find frost on the insides of their windows and ice in their water buckets. You're wearing the same clothes you wore yesterday, and the day before, and the day before that. This isn't because you're lazy or dirty. It's because most people in colonial America own exactly one set of everyday clothes, maybe two if they're lucky. There's one set for everyday work and one set for church on Sundays. The fabric is rough and scratchy against your skin. It's usually made of wool or rough linen woven by hand and sewn by hand, with thick, uneven stitches designed to hold up under years of hardware. Your clothes smell like wood smoke and sweat and general human living, but so does everyone else's, so nobody notices. That's one of those weird things about living in a time when everyone smells pretty much the same. Your nose just stops registering it as unusual. It's background noise, like the sound of cars in a modern city. Walking to the window, you push open the wooden shutters and peer outside. The sun is just starting to rise, painting everything in that soft golden light that makes even the hardest life look beautiful for a moment. You can see other houses scattered around, most of them looking very much like the one you're in. Small wooden with steep roofs and tiny windows. Some are made with a technique called wattle and daub, where thin wooden sticks are woven together like a basket, and then covered with a mixture of mud, straw, and animal dung that hardens into surprisingly sturdy walls. The landscape looks different than you'd expect. There are stumps everywhere, big, thick tree stumps that show where massive trees once stood. Clearing land for farming is backbreaking work that takes years, and colonists often just cut down trees and leave the stumps to rot, rather than spending the enormous effort it takes to dig them out. The fields between the stumps are planted with corn, wheat, or other crops that will hopefully keep everyone fed through the winter. You can see smoke rising from chimneys all around the area. Everyone's starting their day the same way, getting the fire going, because fire is literally life in colonial America. Without fire, you can't cook food, heat water, stay warm, or have light when the sun goes down. Keeping a fire going safely is a skill that can mean the difference between life and death, especially in winter. The sound of chickens clucking and roosters crowing fills the air. Almost every family keeps chickens because eggs, and the occasional chicken dinner are crucial sources of protein. You might also hear the lowing of a cow or the snorting of pigs. Animals aren't pets here, and they're walking food supplies, and they're often kept close to the house where they can be protected from wild animals and thieves. Your stomach rumbles again, louder this time. Time to think about breakfast, though breakfast is a generous term for what you're about to eat. Most colonial families start the day with something called mush. Basically, a porridge made from cornmeal and water, maybe with a little milk if the cow is producing. If you're lucky, there might be a bit of molasses or honey to sweeten it, but sugar is incredibly expensive, and most families rarely taste it. The woman of the house is already in the kitchen area, which isn't really a separate room, but just one end of the main room where the big fireplace is. She's building up the fire, feeding small sticks, and kindling to the coals that she kept alive overnight. This is skilled work. If the fire dies completely, she'll have to walk to a neighbour's house to get live coals to restart it, because matches won't be invented for another century or so. You can hear the scrape of metal on metal as she hangs an iron pot over the fire. Everything about cooking here is heavy and hot and dangerous. The pots are made of thick iron that weighs more than you'd believe. The fire throws off sparks and unpredictable heat. Burns are incredibly common, and a serious burn can easily kill you, because there are no antibiotics or modern medical care. Water for the mush has to be carried from somewhere else. Maybe a well, maybe a stream, maybe just a rain barrel where water is collected and stored. There are no taps, no pipes, no indoor plumbing of any kind. Every drop of water used in the house has to be carried in by hand, bucket by bucket. That makes you very conscious of how much water you use. Washing dishes means heating water over the fire and using as little as possible. The smell of the cornmeal porridge starts to fill the house as it cooks. It's not an unpleasant smell, earthy and warm and filling. Your mouth starts to water because your body knows that this simple food is going to have to fuel you through a day of hard physical work. There's no such thing as sitting around in colonial America. Everyone, including children, works from sunrise to sunset just to keep the family alive and fed. While the food cooks, you might hear the sound of someone else in the family starting their morning chores. Maybe it's the crack of wood being split for the fire or the squeak of a door as someone goes out to check on the animals. Even young children have jobs feeding chickens, gathering eggs, carrying water or sweeping floors. There's always work to be done, and everyone's labour is necessary for survival. The house around you is small and simple, but it represents an enormous amount of work. Every piece of wood was cut by hand and shaped by hand. Every nail was made by a blacksmith, one at a time. The windows, if they're any real windows with glass, cost more than most people earn in months. Nothing here was mass-produced or came from a store. Almost everything was made by the family or traded for with neighbours. You're starting to understand something that modern people often forget: how much work it took just to survive in earlier times. Staying fed, staying warm, staying dry, staying healthy. These weren't things you could take for granted. They were daily challenges that required constant attention and hard work. But here's something beautiful about it. The people around you know how to do things that most modern people have never learned. They can build a house, grow food, preserve meat, make clothes, cure illnesses with herbs, and create useful tools from raw materials. They're incredibly skilled and self-sufficient in ways that might surprise you. The porridge is ready now. The woman of the house ladles it into wooden bowls. There are no plates as you know them. Most families eat from wooden trenchers, which are basically thick wooden boards with hollows carved out for food. Spoons exist, but forks are rare, and knives are mostly for cutting, not eating. Most people eat with their hands or use pieces of bread to scoop up food. The mush is hot and filling, though not particularly flavourful. There's no salt unless the family can afford to buy it, and most seasonings or whatever herbs can be grown locally. But when you're hungry and facing a day of hard work, even plain food tastes good. Your body craves the calories and carbohydrates that will give you energy for the physical labour ahead. As you eat, you start to think about the day ahead. If you're lucky enough to live on a farm, and most colonists do, your day will be spent doing whatever work the season demands. In spring, that might mean ploughing fields or planting crops. In summer, it's weeding and tending the growing plants. In fall, it's harvesting and preserving food for winter. In winter, it's maintaining tools, spinning thread, making clothes and trying to stay warm. The rhythm of life here follows the seasons and the sun. You go to bed when it gets dark because candles are expensive and firelight is dim. You wake up when the sun rises because there's no point lying in bed when there's work to be done. Your schedule is determined by the weather, the crops, and the animals, not by clocks or calendars. Outside, you can hear the sound of other families starting their days, children's voices as they do their morning chores, the thunk of an axe biting into wood, the squeak of a well rope as someone draws water, the sound of a cow being milked. These are the sounds of a community where everyone depends on everyone else for survival. And survival really is the key word here. You're living in a time when a bad harvest means hunger, when a harsh winter means death, when a simple injury can become infected and kill you. There are no hospitals, no grocery stores, no government programs to help when things go wrong. Families and communities have to take care of themselves and each other. But there's also something deeply satisfying about this life, even with all its hardships. When you grow your own food, build your own shelter, and make your own clothes, you have a connection to the basic necessities of life that most modern people never experience. You know exactly where your food comes from and how much work it took to produce it. You understand the value of simple things like a warm fire or a dry roof over your head. The porridge is finished now, and it's time to start the real work of the day. Your body feels heavy and warm with food, ready for whatever physical challenges lie ahead. The fire is burning steady and bright, promising warmth and the ability to cook dinner later. The sun is rising higher, bringing light and the promise of another day survived in this challenging, but ultimately rewarding world. You're about to step into a day that will test your strength, your skills, and your endurance. But you're also about to experience the deep satisfaction that comes from using your hands and your back to create something valuable, to contribute to your family's survival, and to be part of a community where everyone's work matters. As you step outside into the crisp morning air, the first thing you notice is how different this world smells compared to what you might expect. There's the clean scent of wood smoke. Yes. But underneath that, there's something earthier, more pungent. It's the smell of a world without modern sanitation, where humans and animals live much closer together than you're used to, and where the idea of taking a bath is almost unthinkable. The house you just left represents months of back-breaking labour. Every single piece of wood was cut by hand using saws that had to be sharpened constantly. The walls were built using a technique that would seem almost impossible today. First, the men of the community came together to raise a wooden frame. Massive beams of oak or pine that were shaped with hand tools and joined together with wooden pegs and careful carpentry. You can see the marks where broad axes shaped each beam, leaving surfaces that are smooth, but obviously handmade. Between those wooden beams, the walls are filled with something called wattle and daub. Picture this. Thin wooden sticks, maybe as thick as your thumb, woven together like a giant basket. Then comes the daub, a mixture that might make your stomach turn. It's mud, yes, but mixed with straw, animal hair, and often animal dung, cow manure, horse manure, whatever was available. The mixture is plastered over the woven sticks and left to dry into walls that are surprisingly strong and weatherproof. If you ran your hand along the inside wall of the house, you'd feel the rough texture where this mixture was smoothed by hand. Sometimes you can still see handprints in the dry door where someone pressed too hard while working. These aren't perfect, smooth walls like you're used to. They're organic, uneven, shaped by human hands working with whatever materials the land provided. The roof above your head is probably made of thatch, layers and layers of dried straw or reeds. It's woven together so tightly that water runs off instead of soaking through. Building a thatched roof is an art form that takes years to learn. The thatcher starts at the bottom and works up, layering the straw so that each row overlaps the one below it. When it's done properly, a thatched roof can last for decades and keep a house completely dry, even in the worst storms. But here's something that might surprise you about colonial houses. There are usually just 1 or 2 rooms total. That house you woke up in, it might be home to a family of 8 or 10 people. Parents, children, grandparents, maybe a servant or 2, all living in a space smaller than many modern bedrooms. Privacy, as you understand it, simply doesn't exist. Everyone sleeps in the same room. Everyone shares the same space. And everyone knows everyone else's business. The lack of privacy extends to something that modern people find almost unimaginable. What happens when you need to use the bathroom? As you walk around the property, you notice a small wooden structure set back from the house, maybe 50 or 100 feet away. That's the privy, or outhouse, and it's where every member of the family takes care of their most basic biological needs. The outhouse is basically a wooden shed built over a deep hole in the ground. Inside there's a wooden seat with a hole cut in it, and underneath that hole is a pit that might be 6 or 8 feet deep. There's no toilet paper that won't be invented for another century. Instead, there might be corn cobs, old rags, or just smooth stones for cleaning yourself. In winter, going to the outhouse means bundling up and trudging through snow and ice for what might be a very unpleasant few minutes. But here's the thing that really shows how different life was. When that pit gets full, someone has to dig a new one and move the outhouse. Imagine that job on a hot summer day. The waste doesn't just disappear. It sits there fermenting and attracting flies and creating smells that would make a modern person sick. And because most colonial settlements are built near water sources like streams or wells, that waste often seeps into the ground and contaminates the drinking water. This contamination is one of the biggest killers in colonial America. Diseases like dysentery, typhoid fever, and cholera spread like wildfire through communities where human waste and drinking water mix. You might remember reading about Valley Forge, where George Washington's army spent that terrible winter. What you might not know is that more of his soldiers died from disease than from cold or hunger. About 23 of the men who died at Valley Forge were killed by dysentery and typhoid fever, diseases that spread because of poor sanitation. When night falls or the weather is too harsh for a trip to the outhouse, families use chamber pots. These are basically ceramic or metal bowls that people use as toilets inside the house. Every morning someone, usually a woman or child, has to empty these pots. And where do they empty them? Often they just dump them out the nearest window. If you were walking down a street in colonial Boston or Philadelphia, you'd want to stay alert for the cry of Gardy-Loo, a warning that someone was about to dump a chamber pot from an upstairs window. The streets themselves are something that would shock modern sensibilities. There's no garbage collection, no street cleaning, no sewage system. People throw their household waste directly into the street. Food scraps, broken pottery, old clothes, and yes, human waste all end up in the roadways. Add to that the droppings from all the horses, cows, pigs, and chickens that share the streets with people, and you get a picture of urban life that's hard to imagine. When it rains, these streets become rivers of filth. When it's dry, the waste turns to dust that blows around and gets into everything. The smell is something you'd have to experience to believe, and this isn't just in poor neighbourhoods. Even the wealthiest parts of colonial cities deal with these same sanitation problems. Given all this, you might think that people in colonial times were constantly trying to get clean. But here's something that would absolutely amaze a modern person. Most colonists almost never take baths. Not because they're lazy or don't care about being clean, but because the very idea of immersing your whole body in water is seen as dangerous, unhealthy, and possibly immoral. The typical colonial American might wash their face and hands once a day, using a cloth and a basin of water. That's it. That's the extent of their daily hygiene routine. Their bodies, from neck to toe, might not be washed with soap and water for months at a time, maybe not even once a year. Full body bathing is reserved for infants, and even then it's more about hardening them against disease than about getting them clean. Why this fear of bathing? Part of it comes from medical beliefs of the time. Many doctors believe that water can weaken the body or make it more susceptible to disease. They think that the natural oils and dirt on your skin actually protect you from illness. The idea that cleanliness prevents disease, something we take for granted, simply hasn't been discovered yet. Religion plays a role too. Some religious leaders preach that too much attention to the body is vanity, and that suffering through discomfort is good for the soul. The Puritans, who have a huge influence on colonial culture, believe that cleanliness is important for moral reasons, but they mean clean clothes and tidy homes, not clean bodies. There's also the practical matter of heating water. Remember, every drop of water has to be carried by hand and heated over a fire. Heating enough water to fill a bathtub would take hours and use enormous amounts of precious firewood. For most families, it's just not worth the expense and effort. So, what do people smell like? Well, everyone smells pretty much the same. Like wood smoke, sweat, and the general scent of human bodies that haven't been washed. Clothes are rarely laundered because soap is expensive, and the process of washing clothes is incredibly labour-intensive. Most people own only 1 or 2 sets of clothes, and they wear them until they literally fall apart. The soap that does exist is nothing like what you're familiar with. Colonial soap is made from animal fat and lye, which is created by filtering water through wood ashes. The process is dangerous. Lye can burn your skin, and the resulting soap is harsh and caustic. It's primarily used for washing dishes and clothes, not bodies. Using this soap on your skin would leave you red, irritated, and probably with chemical burns. Women's hair is kept covered almost all the time, partly for religious reasons and partly because washing hair is almost impossible. They might brush it and rebrand it, but actually washing it with soap and water is a rare event. Men often keep their hair short or shave their heads completely and wear wigs instead. The wigs can be cleaned more easily than natural hair, and they can be removed if they become too infested with lice. And lice are everywhere, absolutely everywhere. Body lice, head lice, clothes lice, they're just part of life. Everyone has them, from the poorest farmer to the wealthiest merchant. George Washington himself complained about wigs full of lice. People try to control them by combing their hair with fine-toothed combs and by boiling their clothes, but completely getting rid of lice is nearly impossible in a world without effective cleaning methods. The smell of unwashed human bodies is just background noise in colonial life. When everyone smells the same, your nose stops noticing it. It's like how people who live near a paper mill stop smelling the sulphur, or how people in modern cities stop hearing traffic noise. Your senses adapt to what's normal in your environment, But the consequences of all this poor sanitation go far beyond just smells and discomfort. Disease spreads rapidly through communities where people live close together without proper hygiene. Smallpox, measles, influenza, and other contagious diseases can wipe out entire families or even whole settlements. Medical knowledge is primitive, and there are no antibiotics or vaccines. When someone gets sick, their family can only hope and pray, and try whatever folk remedies they know. Even minor infections can become life-threatening. A small cut that gets dirty can lead to blood poisoning. A tooth infection can spread to the brain. Childbirth is incredibly dangerous because there's no understanding of germs or sterile conditions. Many women die in childbirth, and those who survive often suffer from infections that plague them for the rest of their lives. The irony is that people in colonial times often live closer to nature and get more physical exercise than modern people, which should make them healthier. And in some ways, they are. They're usually stronger and more physically capable than people today. But the lack of basic sanitation and medical knowledge means they die young from diseases that would be easily treatable now. Children are especially vulnerable. It's not uncommon for families to lose half their children before they reach adulthood. Parents don't even name babies until they're several months old because infant mortality is so high. When you see colonial graveyards, you'll notice how many tiny headstones are marking the graves of children who lived only days or weeks. Despite all these challenges, colonial families develop strategies for dealing with the realities of their time. They burn certain herbs to mask odour and hopefully repel insects. They change their clothes more often than they wash their bodies. They keep their living spaces as clean as possible, even if their bodies aren't clean by modern standards. And there's something to be said for the resilience this lifestyle builds. People in colonial times have incredibly strong immune systems because they are constantly exposed to germs and bacteria. Those who survive childhood are often remarkably hardy and able to withstand conditions that would make modern people seriously ill. The community aspect of colonial life also helps people cope with the hardships when everyone faces the same challenges. There's a sense of shared struggle that brings people together. Neighbours help each other with difficult tasks, share resources during hard times, and provide emotional support when tragedy strikes. As you stand outside that colonial house, breathing in the morning air with all its complex smells, you're experiencing a world that's both harsher and more intimate than anything most modern people can imagine. It's a world where survival depends on community, where physical strength and practical skills matter more than book learning, and where the simple act of staying alive through another day is an achievement worth celebrating. The sun is climbing higher now, and the day's work is calling. Time to discover what it really means to earn your living with your hands and your back in a world where there are no shortcuts, no machines to do the work for you, and no safety net if you fail. The workday in colonial America begins the moment you can see your hand in front of your face, and it doesn't end until the last light fades from the sky. You're about to discover that staying alive in this era requires a level of physical effort that would exhaust most modern people within hours. Every single thing you eat, every piece of clothing you wear, every tool you use has to be created by hand from raw materials using techniques passed down through generations. Your empty stomach reminds you that the morning's cornmeal mush was just the beginning of a day centered around food, growing it, preparing it, preserving it, and constantly worrying about whether there will be enough to last through the winter. The difference between a good harvest and a bad harvest is literally the difference between life and death, and that knowledge shapes every decision a colonial family makes. If you're living on a farm, and remember most colonists do, your day revolves around the endless cycle of agricultural work. Right now, in early morning, you can hear the sounds of animals that need tending. The cow needs milking, and that's usually a woman's job, though older children might help. Milking isn't the simple, peaceful process you might imagine from pictures. Cows in colonial times are smaller than modern dairy cows, but they're also more temperamental, and they give much less milk. The woman doing the milking sits on a low wooden stool beside the cow, holding a wooden bucket between her knees. Her hands work in a rhythm that she learned as a child. Squeeze, pull, while the cow shifts and stamps and occasionally tries to kick. The milk comes out warm and frothy, and sometimes the cow decides she doesn't want to be milked and tries to step in the bucket or knock it over. Getting a gallon of milk might take an hour of patient, skilled work. That milk is precious beyond anything you can imagine. There's no refrigeration, so it has to be used quickly or turned into something that will keep longer. Some of it might be churned into butter, a process that involves putting cream in a wooden churn and agitating it for what feels like hours until the fat separates into solid butter and liquid buttermilk. Your arms would ache from the constant motion of working the churn paddle. Some milk gets made into cheese, which involves heating it gently, adding something acidic like vinegar to make it curdle, then pressing the curds in cloth to squeeze out the liquid whey. The cheese can be aged in cool cellars to last through winter months when the cow produces less milk or stops producing altogether. The egg from the chickens need gathering too, and this is often a job for children. You'd carry a basket and search through the chicken coop, reaching carefully under hens that might peck your hand if they're feeling protective of their eggs. Chickens in colonial times aren't the plump, docile birds you see on modern farms. They're smaller, scrappier, more like wild birds, and they can be surprisingly aggressive when they want to be. But the real work of colonial life happens in the fields. If you're a man or boy, you'll spend most of your day doing agricultural work that would break the back of someone not used to it. Ploughing a field means walking behind a wooden plough pulled by oxen or horses, holding the handles and keeping the blade at just the right angle to cut through the soil. The ground is rough and full of rocks and roots, so the plough jumps and jerks constantly, sending shocks up through your arms and shoulders. You don't have neat flat fields like modern farms. Colonial fields are full of tree stumps because cutting down trees is one thing, but digging out the massive root systems is almost impossible with hand tools. So, farmers plant around the stumps and hope they'll rot away eventually. The fields are also full of rocks that have to be picked up by hand and carried to the edges to build stone walls. This rock picking is endless. Every spring, frost pushes new rocks up from deep in the ground. Planting is done by hand, seed by seed. Corn kernels are dropped into holes made with a pointed stick, a few kernels per hole, spaced far enough apart that the plants won't compete with each other. Beans might be planted between the corn rows so they can climb the corn stalks. Squash grows along the ground between the rows, creating what Native Americans call the Three Sisters. Corn, beans, and squash grown together in a system that helps all three plants thrive. The work is rhythmic and mindless in some ways, but also requires constant attention. Plant too shallow and birds will eat the seeds. Plant too deep and they won't sprout. Space them wrong and the plants will crowd each other out. Every movement has to be precise, and you're doing this for hours at a time, bent over in the sun, with sweat stinging your eyes and dirt grinding between your teeth. Weeding the crops is even more tedious. Armed with a hoe, a wooden handle with a metal blade, you chop out weeds that grow between the crop plants. This has to be done regularly all summer long because weeds grow faster than crops and will choke them out if given the chance. You develop a rhythm. Chop, step, chop, step, working your way down endless rows while the sun beats down on your back. Harvest time is when everyone in the family works together from dawn to dusk. Corn has to be picked by hand, ear by ear, and then the kernels have to be removed from the cobs. This is often done as a community activity with several families gathering together for a corn husking bee. People sit in a circle talking and laughing while their hands work automatically, stripping kernels from cobs and dropping them into baskets. Wheat and other grains are cut with hand tools called seethes, long wooden handles with curved metal blades. Using a scythe properly is an art that takes years to learn. You swing the blade in a smooth arc, cutting through the grain stalks close to the ground while walking forward at just the right pace. Do it wrong, and you'll either miss the grain or cut yourself with the razor-sharp blade. The cut grain has to be gathered into bundles called sheaves, then loaded onto carts and taken to a barn where it can be threshed, beaten with wooden tools called flails to separate the grain from the stalks. Then the grain has to be winnowed, which means tossing it in the air on a windy day, so the lighter chaff blows away and the heavier grain falls into baskets. Food preservation is a constant concern because there's no way to keep things fresh for long. Meat gets smoked, salted, or dried into jerky. Vegetables are pickled in brine or vinegar. Fruits are dried or made into preserves with precious sugar or honey. Root vegetables like turnips and carrots can be stored in cool cellars buried in sand or straw to keep them from freezing or rotting. The smokehouse is a small building where meat is hung over smouldering fires for days or weeks. The smoke not only flavours the meat, but also preserves it by driving out moisture and creating chemicals that prevent spoilage. Tending a smokehouse fire requires skill. Too hot, and the meat cooks instead of smoking. Too cool, and it spoils before it's preserved. Making salt pork involves packing pieces of pork in barrels with layers of coarse salt. The salt draws out moisture and creates an environment where harmful bacteria can't grow. Salt beef, salt fish. These preserved foods can last for months and provide protein when fresh meat isn't available. While the men and boys work in the fields, women and girls have their own exhausting list of tasks that never end. Making clothes starts with growing flax for linen or raising sheep for wool. Flax has to be harvested, soaked in water until it rots slightly, then beaten and combed to separate the fibres. Sheep have to be sheared once a year, and their wool has to be cleaned, sorted and prepared for spinning. Spinning thread is a skill that takes years to master. Using a spinning wheel, a woman draws out fibres and twists them into continuous thread, controlling the thickness and strength with subtle movements of her fingers. A skilled spinner can produce several 100 yards of thread in a day, but it requires hours of concentrated work. The spinning wheel makes a constant humming sound as the wheel turns, and women often sing or tell stories while they work to help pass the time. The thread then has to be woven into cloth on a loom, a wooden frame that holds parallel threads called the warp, while the weaver passes other threads called the weft back and forth through them. Operating a loom is like playing a musical instrument. Your hands and feet work together in complex patterns, and the rhythm becomes almost hypnotic after a while. But even after the cloth is woven, the work isn't done. Wool cloth has to be fulled, washed and beaten to make the fibres lock together and create a denser, warmer fabric. Linen has to be bleached by laying it out in the sun and dampening it repeatedly over weeks or months. Then the cloth has to be cut and sewn into clothes using patterns passed down from mother to daughter. All sewing is done by hand, stitch by tiny stitch. A woman might spend weeks making a single shirt, and every stitch has to be strong enough to withstand years of hardware and harsh washing. The thread is made from the same fibres as the cloth, and needles are precious metal tools that are carefully maintained and never lost. Cooking is another full-time job that requires constant attention and skill. Every meal has to be prepared over an open fire in the fireplace using heavy iron pots that hang from hooks and chains. Controlling the heat means moving pots closer to or farther from the flames, adding or removing logs and constantly tending the fire to keep it at the right temperature. Bread baking happens in a stone or brick oven built into the side of the fireplace. First, a fire is built inside the oven chamber and allowed to burn until the stones are heated through. Then, the coals and ashes are scraped out. Loaves of bread are placed inside on wooden paddles, and the opening is sealed with a door or clay plug. The residual heat from the stones bakes the bread slowly and evenly, but you can only bake when the oven is hot. So bread baking is a major production that happens once or twice a week. Women often coordinate with neighbours so that several families can use the same oven on the same day, taking turns sliding their loaves in and out of the hot chamber. Preparing other meals means constant stirring of stews and porches to keep them from burning. Careful attention to roasting meat on spits that have to be turned by hand, and managing multiple pots and pans over a fire that throws off sparks and unpredictable heat. Burns are incredibly common, and a serious burn can easily become infected and kill you. Water for cooking and cleaning has to be carried from a well or stream bucket by bucket. In winter, this might mean breaking ice and melting it over the fire. In summer, it means walking to the water source multiple times a day with heavy buckets that leave your shoulders aching. Washing dishes is done with minimal water and harsh soap, and pots are often just scraped clean and wiped out rather than truly washed. The same pot might be used to cook several different foods in sequence, each one picking up flavours from what came before. Laundry is an occasional nightmare that involves heating large quantities of water, scrubbing clothes on washboards with harsh soap, rinsing them in cold water and wringing them out by hand before hanging them to dry. Women often do laundry together as a community activity, sharing the work and the large vessels needed to heat water. The rhythm of colonial work follows the seasons and the daylight. In summer, when days are long, people work as much as 16 hours a day. In winter, when daylight is precious, they work by firelight, but mostly focus on indoor tasks like spinning, weaving, and tool repair. Everyone in the family has essential work to do. Children as young as 5 or 6 have regular chores that contribute to the family's survival. Boys help their fathers with farming and learn skills like carpentry, blacksmithing, or whatever trade the father practices.